Welcome, welcome, welcome to the deep dive. I'm truly excited about the journey we're embarking on today. We're diving deep into the profound, timeless wisdom of one of history's greatest mystics and poets, Rumi, and his epic masterpiece, the Masnavi. Our mission today is to unpack a truly compelling section from Book One, revealing its timeless spiritual lessons, its surprising and vivid metaphors, and most importantly, how all of this connects directly to personal insight and, well, to your own life.
That's right. This deep dive draws from a rich collection of excerpts from the Masnavi, Book One. What's fascinating here is how Rumi crafts a narrative that seems quite simple on the surface but then builds layers upon layers of meaning. We're going to explore how he masterfully uses a captivating story to convey complex philosophical and spiritual truths that resonate just as powerfully today as they did centuries ago.
Okay, let's get into this tale then. It begins with a magnificent figure, a king, described as most glorious and refined, with spiritual and temporal power combined. So this isn't just any ruler. He's a man of immense authority in every sense. One day he's out hunting, leading his friends, when suddenly his world shifts. He sees a slave girl, and Rumi tells us his soul became her servant straight away. It's this immediate, overwhelming love that takes hold of his very being. His old heart fluttered like a caged young bird, and he doesn't hesitate to pay her price. But just as this new love is secured, Rumi writes, by fate an illness overcame the maid. It's sudden, totally unexpected. And Rumi uses these incredibly vivid, almost jarring images to convey the shock. Like buying saddles for your mule one day to find that wolves have chased it far away. Or fetching water with your finest pot for it to smash as if there's been a plot. The dream is just shattered in an instant, so naturally he's desperate. The king calls for healers from all distant lands. His plea is truly heartbreaking, declaring, "My life is over till she's well again, for she's my medicine, distinguished men." He promises immense treasure to whoever can cure her.
And here's where Rumi introduces a crucial turning point, highlighting a fatal flaw in these so-called experts. They confidently declare, "We're the messiahs for the world's distress, a salve for every wound we each possess." Big talk. But crucially, Rumi states, they skipped "if God wills" through their arrogance.
Ah, yes.
And this isn't just about uttering the words, as Rumi clarifies, it's about the genuine intention from inside one's heart.
Yes.
It's a profound commentary on humility, right? Not just lip service.
Right. It has to be real.
Exactly. And the consequence of this arrogance, it's immediate and devastating. The more these men produced a salve or cure, the more distress the girl seemed to endure. Their remedies, like almond oil, only made her drier still. Fruit worsened her constipation, and water increased the flames, as if a curse. It paints this picture of utter human impotence when separated from that divine acknowledgement.
That initial dramatic failure, it's such a stark image, isn't it? It really forces you to consider, what does Rumi want us to take from that immediate collapse of human effort, even with all the king's vast resources and the healer's supposed expertise?
Exactly. And I think what Rumi's showing us here is powerful.
Yeah.
Sometimes hitting rock bottom with our own efforts when all our best human solutions fail isn't a dead end. It might actually be the crucial first step toward a completely different, deeper kind of breakthrough.
Interesting.
It forces us to ask, where else do I need to let go and trust something beyond my immediate control? It really sets the stage for a healing that transcends purely human knowledge.
Okay, so after witnessing this repeated failure, the king's approach shifts dramatically. Rumi describes how, after he watched them fail each single day, the king ran barefoot to the mosque to pray. This isn't a casual prayer. He's utterly sincere, confessing at the prayer niche all his fears. He drenched the rug beneath him with his tears. It's a total surrender, a turning to a higher power in complete humility.
And his prayer is profound. It's an acknowledgement of God's hidden wisdom. "O you whose smallest gift is the whole world, words can't describe this mystery you've unfurled." He admits, once more we've strayed by failing to take heed. He owns it.
Yeah.
And God's response to this heartfelt plea is beautiful. "Though I know your secrets well, it doesn't mean I don't want you to tell." It signifies that God desires our direct connection and sincere communication, even when, all is known.
And from this deep sincerity, the king receives divine guidance. As he's overcome with sleep and tears, an old man appears in a dream with a deep voice promising help. "Tomorrow to your aid our man will bring." Oh, trust him as one who's mastered how to cure. Accept his word, for he's sincere and pure. It's a direct promise of intervention and a completely new kind of healer. The next day, the king gazes from his watchtower, filled with this eager anticipation. He spots the promised saint beyond the crowd. Rumi says, among the shadows he was like a sun, and he recognizes him immediately from his dream.
Wow.
The connection is profound and instant. Their souls without a thread were sewn as one, and the king, instead of sending his servants, personally goes to greet this guest, showing immense humility now.
Yeah, and before we dive into the saint's actual cure, Rumi makes a really crucial digression here.
Oh.
He underscores the importance of what he calls good manners, but it's deeper than just etiquette, right? It's about reverence.
Reverence, okay.
He writes, let's pray to God for manners in their place, since those who lack them lose out on his grace. He then provides these historical examples. Moses' men complaining about the divine feast. Why weren't some lentils spiced with garlic broth? Which led to the feast being cleared.
Ungrateful.
Totally. And Jesus' greedy followers who, like beggars, grabbed the most they could collect, despite being told the feast was infinite.
Yeah.
So this section raises a really interesting question about ripple effects. How does seemingly small irreverence or ingratitude have such large consequences? Rumi connects it to broader societal and even cosmic shifts. If you withhold zakat, that's the obligatory charity or purification tax in Islam, then rain won't fall, and fornication spreads a plague to all.
That's heavy.
It is. He states that irreverence caused eclipses of the sun, and Satan, through his pride, to be undone. This powerful commentary suggests that good manners and reverence aren't just niceties, but prerequisites for receiving and maintaining divine grace and bounty. It's about the underlying attitude, gratitude and humility.
And that profound welcome from the king, embracing the saint like love inside his heart, it really drives home the contrast, doesn't it? After the arrogance of the first healers, this is total humility and trust in someone completely new.
Exactly.
It feels like a breakthrough in itself, even before any healing actually begins. It underscores that genuine spiritual understanding and healing often come not from force or intellect, but from a deep intuitive connection, born of humility and a willingness to receive. Now, this is where the story takes a truly fascinating turn. Unlike the previous arrogant healers, the saint takes an entirely different approach to diagnosis. He tells the king, vacate your house today. Even your family must be sent away.
Clearing the space.
So no one's listening from the corridors while I interrogate the girl indoors. Once alone, he gently, patiently questions the girl, monitoring her pulse, asking about her origins, family, friends, very methodically.
And what's truly compelling here is the metaphor Rumi uses to describe her hidden pain. If in your foot it proves so hard to find, imagine one that's pierced your heart and mind. The doctor's method asking about places and people, carefully observing her pulse. It's like someone carefully pressing around a foot to find that hidden thorn.
Yeah.
He's not looking for a physical symptom, but rather the emotional, the spiritual root of her suffering, which is often far more elusive and painful.
And then the big reveal. As the saint methodically goes through her past, her pulse stays stable as she talks about various towns and people. But then, until he asked the girl of Samarkand, her pulse increased to rates beyond compare. She'd been kept from a certain goldsmith there.
Ah, there it is.
So her illness wasn't physical at all. It was heartbreak, a profound longing for this goldsmith in Samarkand.
And this immediately shifts the focus to the very nature of love and suffering, which Rumi then eloquently addresses. He declares, no sickness hurts as much as when hearts break.
That's powerful.
It really is. And profoundly, he tells us, love is the astrolabe of all we seek. Whether you feel divine or earthly love, ultimately, we're destined for above. This implies that even our earthly loves, with all their pains and joys, are like a compass, a spiritual instrument pointing us towards the divine. Rumi further explains how expressing love, well, it defies conventional explanation. True love through silence only one can hear.
Silence. Interesting.
And love's nature only love can demonstrate. Logic, he says, is like a donkey stuck in mud is logic's fate. It just fails where love prevails. Love, like the sun, reveals its own nature and is simply beyond the confines of rational thought.
The doctor then reassures the girl, promising a cure and advising her to keep her secret safe. Whoever hides his dream attains it sooner through the Lord Supreme. He uses these beautiful metaphors for this secrecy, comparing it to seeds hidden underground for growth, or metals purifying deep within a mine.
Right. It suggests that true transformation often happens in hidden, protected spaces, nurtured by divine grace, away from external interference or, premature exposure.
Now, for the truly radical part of this cure, the doctor's plan. Summon the goldsmith.
Wow. Okay.
The king, having learned his lesson in humility, immediately obeys. No questions asked this time. The goldsmith is lured by promises of robe of honor and this gold, blissfully unaware of his true, horrifying fate. Rumi's commentary is stark. Conceited fool, you failed to comprehend, so eagerly you raced to your own end.
Yikes.
He rode an Arabian stud horse to his own blood, thinking only of majesty that wouldn't cease, total self-absorption. The king then unites the girl and the goldsmith, marrying them. For 6 months, they thrive, and the girl seemingly recovers completely, but then the doctor administers a potion. It causes the goldsmith to rot, becoming ugly and losing his youthfulness.
Oh my goodness.
As his looks worsen, the girl's love for him grows cold, just evaporates.
And what's absolutely unsparing here is Rumi's commentary on superficial love. Love, which is based on just a pretty face, is not true love. It ends in sheer disgrace. Very. The goldsmith's beauty, once his pride, became his downfall. Rumi compares it to the peacock's feathers or the elephant's ivory, a beauty that leads to their capture or demise. The goldsmith's dying words are incredibly poignant and serve as this universal warning, truly an aha moment in the text. The world's a mountain, actions like a shout. Your echo will return to you, watch out.
Wow, the echo.
It emphasizes that immutable law of cause and effect, doesn't it? Where every action, good or bad, ultimately reverberates back to its source. It's a reminder that we are constantly creating our own reality through our deeds.
And with the goldsmith's death, the girl is finally purged of love and pain. Now let's unpack this crucial spiritual lesson. Rumi contrasts love of the dead, which is physical, transient, ultimately unfulfilling, with love of the living, which is divine, eternal, and truly soul-sustaining.
Yeah, that distinction is key.
He implores us, save love for him, eternal and divine, the sake that's the cupbearer offering the soul-extending wine of divine presence. It's a profound call to elevate our affections from the fleeting to the everlasting.
But this entire sequence raises an important question, one that might trouble many listeners, right? How can such a seemingly cruel act, the intentional poisoning of the goldsmith, be justified?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging.
Rumi provides a powerful justification. The doctor acted under divine command, not out of human desire or malice. He connects this to other difficult divine actions, like the story of Khezr, that mysterious figure from the Quran splitting the child's jugular, or Ismail laying his neck for sacrifice.
Acts that seem incomprehensible.
Exactly. These are acts that appear wicked from a limited human perspective, but are ultimately part of a greater hidden divine wisdom and purification. So, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Rumi is telling us that true spiritual insight often transcends conventional morality. What appears wicked on the surface, Rumi says, this red's a rose and not a bloody stain, can be an act of divine purification.
Like refining metal.
Precisely. Religious discipline and suffering loss is so the furnace burns the silver's dross. Just as gold is boiled to remove scum, suffering refines the soul. Even Moses, despite his wisdom, remained veiled from such deeper truths, unable to fully comprehend Khizr's actions. It's a call to trust a wisdom beyond our immediate understanding, recognizing that some harsh realities might serve a higher purifying purpose.
What an incredible journey we've taken through this part of Rumi's Masnavi. From the king's initial arrogance to his desperate divine supplication, from a seemingly physical ailment to the true spiritual heartbreak of the maiden, and finally to a radical, almost shocking cure that challenges our understanding of justice and the very nature of love itself.
The core lesson from this deep dive into Rumi's Masnavi is truly profound, I think. Our perception of reality is often limited by our human understanding and, let's face it, our biases. True healing, true love, and true understanding might come from unexpected, even uncomfortable places, requiring us to trust in a wisdom far greater than our own. It's about looking beyond the surface, beyond what seems conventional, to grasp the deeper divine intention behind the events that unfold in our lives.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? Consider the echo of your own actions, as the goldsmith warned. And what's your goldsmith? What superficial attachment or fleeting desire might be subtly causing your own heartbreak, even if you're not fully aware of it? And maybe ask yourself, are you brave enough to confront that, even if the cure seems radical or uncomfortable, trusting it might be for your deeper spiritual health? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Rumi's timeless wisdom. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper truths that unveil the hidden meanings in the world around you.